My hands trembled as I stared at the thick ivory envelope, the kind reserved for weddings, galas, or old money declarations. It rested on my kitchen counter like a ghost from my past, whispering old doubts into the corners of my mind. The Charleston summer heat pressed in through the windows, but a chill settled in my spine. My name, Savannah Harper, was written in swirling calligraphy, a style my mother insisted was appropriate for family events. I hadn't seen my family in 5 years, not since I walked out of our Georgian estate with nothing but 2 suitcases and a dream they said would amount to nothing. Now, they were inviting me back, not home, of course, to dinner, at my restaurant, and they didn't even know it was mine. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. My name is Savannah Harper. I'm 29 years old, a chef and entrepreneur, and, for the better part of the past 5 years, a ghost to my own bloodline. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a white-columned mansion where manners mattered more than feelings, and appearances were curated more carefully than family photographs. My family is the kind that introduces themselves by the country club they belong to before mentioning their names. And I've always been the odd one out. While my younger brother Jackson breezed through MIT and now works in hedge funds, and my sister Camille was destined for a Southern Belle-style wedding and a law degree by 22. I spent my teenage years burning toast in our housekeeper Rose's kitchen until she finally let me use the stove without supervision. That kitchen, cluttered, warm, filled with the scent of caramelized onions and sun tea steeping by the window, was the only place in that house that felt like mine. But back to the letter. I tore it open with the same reckless courage I once used to walk away from my family's expectations. Inside was a card printed with gold foil edges in cursive script. You are cordially invited to a dinner in honor of Camille Harper and Grant Whitmore's engagement, to be held at the Magnolia Room on Saturday at 7:30 p.m. My breath hitched. The Magnolia Room, my restaurant. They had no idea. I laughed, sharp and sudden, because the irony was too rich. Of all the upscale places in Charleston they could have chosen, they picked the very space I had built from sweat, blisters, and every ounce of pride I had left after leaving home. My family, who once called cooking servants' work, was throwing a party in the dining room I designed, ordering from a menu I curated, sipping wine chosen by my sommelier. For a moment, I considered tossing the invitation into the trash. No confrontation, no drama, just silence. But then something hardened inside me. A need I hadn't felt in a long time, not for validation, but for closure. I hadn't seen Camille since she laughed in my face the night I told my parents I was dropping out of business school to enroll in culinary training. I hadn't spoken to my father, Harold, since he called me a disgrace to our legacy. And my mother? Vivian Harper hadn't so much as texted on my birthday. But now, here they were, celebrating, in my house. And I had a seat at the table. Or, rather, they thought I did. Because they weren't expecting Savannah Harper, the chef. They were expecting the family disappointment, the girl with too many dreams and not enough sense. Probably assumed I was working at the front desk or waiting tables, certainly not running the entire damn place. I stood in my kitchen, the one above the Magnolia Room, where I sometimes stayed on late nights, and looked around. The space was clean, efficient, stainless steel surfaces glinting in the soft morning light. My sanctuary, my victory. Chef Antoine always told me, the heat of the kitchen reveals the fire in your soul. Well, I'd walked through fire, and now I was ready to serve it. But this wouldn't be a performance. I wasn't going to make a grand announcement or rub my success in their faces. I had no interest in parading my achievements like trophies at one of my mother's charity galas. No, if I was going to sit through this dinner, I'd do it on my terms. Quiet, observant, patient. Let them say what they would. Let them underestimate me. Let them dine on my food and judge it without knowing whose hands had created it. And when the moment was right, they'd learn the truth. Not because I needed them to respect me, but because I had stopped needing their respect altogether. This dinner wasn't just a family event. It was my reckoning. The morning of the dinner, Charleston was soaked in a heavy mist that clung to the streets like memory. I stood at the wide bay window of my apartment above the Magnolia Room, staring out at the quiet square below. the familiar smell of sweet magnolia drifting up from the trees. Beneath me, the kitchen staff would be prepping for brunch, slicing herbs, reducing sauces, setting tables. Everything moved like clockwork around here. My clock. The idea that my family would walk into this place tonight with no clue they were stepping into my world still felt surreal. I had rehearsed their reactions in my head a dozen times. My mother's pearl-clutching gasp, my father's barely concealed calculation, Camille's inevitable insult disguised as a compliment. But none of that mattered if I couldn't hold my composure when it actually happened. I poured a coffee. Black. No sugar. Just like Antoine had taught me during those brutal early mornings in New Orleans, where I started my second life. It felt like 1,000 years ago, but it was only 5. 5 years since I stood in the grand foyer of my family's plantation-style home, suitcase in hand, announcing that I was leaving Vanderbilt's business program to train under a French chef. 5 years since my mother had turned her back on me mid-sentence, and my father said, "You're throwing your future away for a hobby." I didn't cry when I left. I waited until I reached the Greyhound bus station. The truth is, I wasn't always strong. I was scared out of my mind. That night, when I arrived in New Orleans with 2 duffel bags and a contact scribbled on a napkin, I nearly turned around. But I didn't. Antoine met me at the back entrance of his restaurant, a hole-in-the-wall joint with peeling blue paint and the best damn gumbo in the state. He didn't ask for my resume or my GPA. He watched me chop an onion and said, "You got hands that understand." That was all it took. For a year, I slept in a shared apartment with 3 other kitchen workers and lived off leftover baguettes and black coffee. I burned sauces, ruined duck confit, nearly sliced off a fingertip once. But every day I showed up. Every day I worked the line. Antoine didn't praise me much, but he didn't fire me either. And in that kitchen, silence was the greatest compliment. He taught me more than technique. He taught me discipline, restraint, humility. "You can't make magic with ego," he used to say. By the second year, I was running Sunday service. By the third, I had investors. James Carlisle, a real estate developer with a palate sharper than his suits, dined at Antoine's one night. I made the special, a Carolina Gold risotto with pickled shrimp and preserved lemon, and he asked to meet the chef. When he found out I was just the sous, his eyebrow rose, but his smile widened. "You ever thought about opening your own place?" he asked. "Because if this is your cooking, Charleston needs it." That's how the Magnolia Room was born. We found a rundown jazz bar just off King Street, gutted the inside, and rebuilt it from the studs. I designed every detail: the lighting, the open kitchen window, the curved mahogany bar, even the menus. James funded the build-out, and I poured every ounce of myself into the food. The restaurant opened to a modest buzz. By month 3, we were booked out weeks in advance. By month 6, we made our first profit. A year later, I bought James out. He called me ruthless with a smile when I handed him the check. None of this, of course, had been shared with my family. Camille occasionally sent me holiday texts. Jackson once tried to call, but we hadn't spoken since. As far as my parents were concerned, I had vanished into the service industry. Just another black sheep wandering around kitchens, chasing a childish dream, which made tonight's dinner feel like a setup from the universe. I glanced at the time. 11:42 a.m. brunch would be winding down soon. I stepped into the hallway, heading downstairs. As I entered the kitchen, the scent of sage butter and caramelized peaches greeted me like old friends. Chef Miranda, my second in command, was plating her seasonal bread pudding, eyes focused, hands steady. She glanced up. "You good?" I nodded. As good as anyone about to serve a 5-course meal to the people who disowned her can be. Miranda cracked a smile. "Want me to slip something into their soup?" Tempting? We moved through final prep. Every detail for the Harper Whitmore dinner was triple-checked. I hadn't added my name to the reservation. It was made under Camille's name, by Emily, Jackson's wife, apparently tasked with booking a chic venue. The irony that she'd chosen mine unknowingly was almost too much. At 4 p.m., I walked back upstairs, laid out my outfit, a black wrap dress, subtle pearl earrings, low heels, understated elegance, Charleston classic. I tied my hair in a low knot, clean and neat. No Chef Whites tonight, just Savannah, the version they still thought was lost. As the sun dipped low and the scent of honeysuckle wafted in through the open balcony doors, I took one last breath of the world I had built, brick by brick, plate by plate, night by sleepless night, and I whispered to myself the words I'd been waiting 5 years to believe. You're not going back to prove anything. You're going because this is yours now. Charleston nights have a way of wrapping around you like warm silk, beautiful on the outside, suffocating if you're not careful. As I walked the short path from my apartment entrance around to the front doors of the Magnolia Room, I could feel that familiar pressure closing in. My heels clicked against the flagstone, and with every step, memories pulled at my edges like thorns on a rose stem. The restaurant's front facade was lit softly in the golden hour light. Gas lanterns flickered above the curved iron sign, and the scent of lavender and smoked pecan drifted into the air from the kitchen vents. Everything was perfect. Because I had made it so. I wasn't supposed to enter this way. Normally, I came through the back, the way kitchen folk do, quiet, unnoticed. But tonight, I needed to be seen. Through the glass doors, I could already spot them. Of course, they had requested the center table. Of course, my mother had chosen a floral arrangement taller than the actual wine glasses. She was seated in a pale blue dress with a stiff posture and pearls, always the pearls, strung tightly around her neck. Beside her sat my father, Harold, already inspecting the wine list like it was a quarterly investment report. Camille sat like a pageant queen at a judge's table, her ring hand perfectly positioned near her face, showing off the rock on her finger. Beside her, I assumed, sat Grant. His hair was slicked back, his blazer tailored too tightly, and he smiled like he was getting paid to do it. Jackson and Emily rounded out the group, both dressed like they'd come straight from a networking luncheon. Celeste, our hostess, caught sight of me first. Her brows lifted a fraction in surprise. She wasn't used to seeing me come through the front dressed like a guest. "Good evening, miss," she caught herself. "Savannah." I gave her a subtle nod and a soft smile. "They don't know," I mouthed. Her eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly, offering her arm. "Your party is already seated. May I show you to your table?" I inhaled deeply, squared my shoulders, and followed her in. My mother was the first to notice me approaching. Her expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, appraisal, disapproval, all in the span of a few seconds. She stood, leaning in for the expected air kiss, as if no time had passed. "You're finally here," she said, her voice just a shade too warm to be real. "We were beginning to wonder." "I'm exactly on time, Mother," I replied, checking my watch. 7:30, as stated. My father stood with a rehearsed stiffness, offering a quick hug and a firm pat on the back. "You look healthy," which, in Harper speak, meant I hadn't kept myself waif-thin like the rest of Charleston's socialites. Camille barely rose from her seat, offering her cheek like royalty. "This is Grant," she said, gesturing to her fiancé. "Grant, this is my sister Savannah." He extended his hand with a politician's grip, overly firm and too practiced. "Pleasure. Camille's told me some things." I offered a tight smile. "I'm sure she has." I turned to Jackson and Emily. My brother offered a genuine hug, brief but warm. Emily's smile was polite but nervous, no doubt wondering whether this restaurant would pass the family's test. "Well," my mother said as I took my seat, "we've already ordered the champagne. I hope that's acceptable." My gaze flicked to the label. Second most expensive option on our list. Flashy, but not reckless. "So, very Vivian." "Of course," I replied. "Whatever suits the occasion." The room hummed around us, that perfect buzz of silverware and conversation blending with jazz on the low speakers. Every light, every sound level, every scent, handpicked by me. And here they were, critiquing it like they owned the place. Jose, our sommelier, approached with the champagne. His brow arched slightly when he saw me, a silent question. "Should I acknowledge you?" I gave the faintest shake of my head. "Excellent choice," he said to my father, presenting the bottle with elegance before pouring. "Congratulations on the engagement." My father nodded. "We're celebrating a very important match." Grant leaned in with a wink. "I know the manager here," he said proudly. "Called in a favor with a client to get this table." I nearly laughed. The client was likely James Carlyle, my original investor, who still occasionally requested VIP bookings. The irony was sharp enough to slice bread. I'm sure they were happy to help, I said, lifting my glass. To Camille and Grant. The glasses clinked, the crystal catching the light like diamonds. So, my mother said, turning to me, what have you been doing with yourself these past few years? You've been so mysterious? All eyes turned to me, 5 sets all searching for cracks. I sipped my champagne slowly before answering. I've been working in food. Still with that cooking phase? Camille sighed, waving a hand as if I'd confessed to a caffeine addiction. I figured you'd have moved on to something more substantial by now, my father added. Not everyone is meant for corporate, Jackson said, his voice calm but edged. Emily remained quiet. And what exactly do you do? Grant asked. Hostessing? Catering? I've worn a lot of hats, I said vaguely. My mother tilted her head, wearing a smile I knew too well. Well, as long as you're managing to support yourself. Of course, if things get too difficult, our door's always open. A server arrived then, placing an amuse-bouche before each of us, a delicate bite of smoked peach and rosemary creme on a cornmeal crisp. Compliments of the kitchen, Jessica said, her voice steady, her eyes flicking briefly to mine. Camille poked at hers with a manicured nail. Is this all? It's a palate teaser, I explained. The meal hasn't started yet. She rolled her eyes. I know what an amuse-bouche is, Savannah. I did study abroad in Provence, remember? My mother took the smallest possible bite. My father popped the whole thing in. Emily smiled and ate hers in one bite. Jackson nodded in approval. Grant sniffed at his like a critic. Camille didn't touch hers. I don't do smoked food, she announced, pushing the plate away. I watched as Jessica collected the dish, her expression neutral. But I felt it, that flicker of disappointment, that quiet sting of someone insulting your craft. And as I looked around the table at the people I used to long to impress, something inside me shifted. They still thought they knew me. They still believed I was the black sheep. But they were dining in my kingdom, eating the food I'd bled for, unaware that every word they spoke would soon echo differently. Because the night was just beginning. And they had no idea what course was coming next. The first course arrived on cue, golden heirloom tomatoes layered with whipped goat cheese, basil oil, and pickled shallots. Each plate was a painting, colors dancing under the soft amber glow of the pendant lights. Chef Miranda had executed it flawlessly. This dish had taken me weeks to perfect. I'd sourced the tomatoes from a micro-farm outside of Savannah, Georgia, timing the harvest with the exact dinner date once I saw Camille's name on the reservation. Of course, no one at the table knew that. Camille looked at the plate like it had insulted her. Tomatoes? She said, wrinkling her nose. I thought we were having a 5-course tasting menu, not a picnic. It's a southern reinterpretation of caprese, I offered calmly, slicing into my own. My mother lifted her fork, took a careful bite, then glanced toward my plate. Savannah, you're actually eating dairy now? She asked, brow raised. You were always so sensitive to anything rich? I was 15. I've grown out of it. I smiled. And into better cheese. Grant chewed thoughtfully, then made a face. It's a little acidic, don't you think? It's supposed to be, I replied. The pickled shallots balanced the creaminess. My father nodded, though it was more about appearing engaged than understanding flavor. Well, at least they're trying something creative. Trying. I swallowed the word like a pill. For a moment, I wanted to tell them. Wanted to laugh and say I didn't try, I executed. Instead, I pushed the conversation along. So, Camille, how did you and Grant meet? Camille predictably perked up. We met at a charity gala in Charlotte. He was representing his firm. I was doing some legal advising for the hosting committee. It was instant. Instant, Grant repeated with a smirk, taking her hand. She was the only woman there who didn't pretend to like bourbon. I can't stand the stuff, she said with a theatrical shiver. But I do love a well-aged red. Her eyes flicked toward the wine list. I'll see what I can recommend, I said lightly, catching Jose's eye in the corner. He'd been hovering discreetly. He knew the drill. The course was cleared, and I caught Jessica pausing beside Camille's plate, still nearly full. Her eyes met mine for a heartbeat, and I could read the message behind her professional composure. Are we really doing this? Yes, I thought. We are. The second course landed. Seared scallops with corn puree, chili oil, and charred leeks. It was a quiet favorite among regulars, simple in appearance, explosive in flavor. The moment the plates touched the table, my father sat up straighter. Now this looks promising, he announced, cutting into the scallop. He chewed and nodded. Good crust. Too spicy, Camille said after one bite. And this puree, why is it so sweet? It's roasted corn, I said, fresh from a farm in Walterboro. Could have fooled me, she muttered, pushing the plate away. Emily leaned in, gently nudging Jackson. This is incredible, she whispered, and I could see she meant it. She'd always been the quiet one at family events, the observer. Tonight, she seemed unsure which version of me she was sitting next to, the one Camille described or the one plating this food. Savannah, Jackson said finally, what exactly are you doing now? We know you're in food, but what does that mean day to day? I opened my mouth to answer, but Camille cut in. She's probably managing a front of house staff somewhere. Maybe running a cafe? Or are you still at that catering gig you mentioned in your Christmas card 3 years ago? There it was, the jab, softened with a smile but still sharp. I'm still in kitchens, I said. Different ones over the years. Still chasing the dream, my father asked, in the tone people use for marathon runners who never finish the race. It's not chasing, I replied. It's building. Grant, who had been swirling his wine and checking his reflection in the spoon, chuckled. Long hours, low pay. I don't know how you do it. You wouldn't, I said, meeting his eyes. Emily coughed into her napkin. Jackson reached for more water. The third course arrived, hand-rolled pasta with spring peas, crispy prosciutto, and mint oil. Light, fresh, perfectly balanced. One of the house signatures. Camille poked it like it was suspicious. This is it? She asked. 3 bites of noodles? It's a tasting menu, I said, starting to lose patience. Not a buffet. Well, in my day, restaurants served actual meals. My father grumbled. In your day, they also served iceberg lettuce with Thousand Island and called it salad, I muttered, a little louder than intended. He blinked. Camille narrowed her eyes. I took another bite of pasta, letting the mint cut through the tension. Grant speared the pasta with his fork, mangling the delicate ribbons I'd rolled by hand that very morning. So, he said, how are you affording a dinner like this? Silence fell. I manage my finances, I replied. Camille leaned in, eyes gleaming. A dinner here runs, what? 200 a head? Are you dating someone or just racking up credit card debt to keep up appearances? Emily shifted uncomfortably. Jackson opened his mouth, then closed it again. I'm not dating anyone, I said. Then how? Camille pressed. You can barely afford this place. Camille, Jackson warned, but she was on a roll now. I mean, come on, she said, laughing. You work in food service. Let's not pretend you're doing 5-star dining every weekend. I set my fork down. Across the table, Jessica appeared, clearing plates. She could feel it too, the temperature rising. As she stepped away, I caught my reflection in the polished silver water pitcher beside me. My face was calm. Too calm. They were dining in my restaurant, criticizing my food, and daring to ask how I could afford it. I almost told them right then, almost. But I didn't. Because the check hadn't come yet. And that, I knew, would be the final course they'd never forget. The duck breast landed on the table with precision, medium rare, glistening with a cherry gastrique that took 3 days to perfect. It was the 4th course, the heart of the tasting menu, and one I never let anyone but Miranda execute when I wasn't on the line myself. She had done it justice. The farro was toothsome, the duck rested just enough, the sauce velvety but acidic. A triumph. Naturally, Grant was the first to complain. This is undercooked, he announced after one dramatic bite. He grimaced like he'd bitten into something offensive. I asked for my meat well done. You didn't ask, I corrected. And duck isn't meant to be well done. It dries out. He lifted his eyes to mine, lips curled into that smug smirk I was beginning to understand was his default. Well, I don't eat raw poultry. It's not raw. It's medium rare, perfectly safe. But he was already flagging down Jessica. When she arrived, he didn't even look at her. "This is raw," he declared. "Take it back and cook it properly." Jessica glanced at me, just a flicker of emotion behind her professional calm. But I nodded. She'd prepare a fresh portion. We never recooked duck that had already rested. It would be dry as dust. If he wanted ruined duck, he'd get it, on his own terms. Across the table, my mother dabbed her lips with a linen napkin and gave a pointed look toward my plate. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Savannah." "I'm listening." "To what?" "To everything that hasn't changed." That earned me a pause, a twitch in the corner of her eye. She wasn't used to being called out. Not directly, anyway. Emily shifted in her seat. Jackson looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Camille was texting, likely complaining about the wine selection to someone who also couldn't taste nuance. I watched as the replacement duck was placed in front of Grant. Dry, overcooked, gray. He took a bite and smiled smugly. Much better. I didn't say a word. Instead, I sipped the red Jose had paired for this course, a peppery Syrah from the Pacific Northwest. It clashed horribly with the overcooked duck, but Grant didn't know that. He never would. "Let's order another bottle," my father declared, waving at Jose. "Something more impressive." Jose approached with the leather-bound wine list. My father flipped through it theatrically, like a man choosing a car. Finally, he tapped a label near the bottom of the page. "This one," he said proudly. "A Bordeaux should be more robust." I knew that bottle well. I'd selected it myself during a vineyard tour in France last year. It was spectacular. It also cost $820 and paired horribly with the dessert course that would follow. "May I suggest?" My father held up a hand. "I think I know wine, Savannah." I bit my tongue. Jose looked to me. I gave him the faintest nod. Let him have his bottle. I had bigger battles to fight. Dessert arrived. A deconstructed lemon tart with bruleed meringue, thyme sugar crumble, and Meyer lemon curd. One of my proudest inventions. I'd once watched a guest cry after the first bite. Camille took one look and scoffed. "This is dessert?" My mother poked the crumble with a fork, more curious than critical now. Emily took a bite and closed her eyes briefly. "This is beautiful," she said softly. A pause, a crack in the facade, and then, the moment I'd been waiting for. Marcus approached with the check, a black leather folder, elegant and discreet, placed neatly at the center of the table. My father reached for it, but Grant beat him to it. "Please, Richard," he said smoothly. "Allow me." He opened the folder. I waited. His brow furrowed. I waited. He cleared his throat. This seems to be missing the meal." "What?" my father asked, glancing over. "It only lists the wine." Marcus stepped forward, calm and ready. "Is there a problem, sir?" "Yes," Grant said, tapping the paper. "You've forgotten to include the food." Marcus turned his gaze to me. I gave a subtle nod. "There's no error," Marcus replied. "The meal portion has already been taken care of." My mother frowned. "By whom?" Marcus looked back at me and his face softened. "By Miss Savannah," he said with a small bow. "As always." Silence. 6 pairs of eyes turned to me. Grant was frozen mid-breath. Camille's fingers still hovered above her wineglass. My father looked genuinely confused. My mother blinked once, twice. Marcus continued, his voice even. "Miss Savannah's table in the back is prepared, as are the investors for her meeting. Shall I inform them you'll be joining shortly?" "Please," I said calmly, "and close out Mr. Whitmore's beverage tab." Marcus gave a slight bow. "Very good, Miss Savannah." He took the folder from Grant's limp hands and disappeared with the ease of a man who had just dropped a bomb and walked away before the dust settled. The silence around the table stretched like pulled sugar. Finally, my mother spoke. "What is happening?" I met her eyes, steady and clear. "You're having dinner at the Magnolia Room?" She blinked. "Yes, I'm aware." I smiled. "I own the Magnolia Room." Another silence. Then Camille laughed, short, sharp, disbelieving. "You work here?" "No," I said. "I own it. I'm the executive chef and sole proprietor." "That's not possible," she said immediately. "This place was just featured in Bon Appetit. It's on every best of list in Charleston." Yes. I nodded. And I put it there. Grant finally spoke. But you said you were working in food. You didn't say, I wanted to see how you treat me, I said. If you thought I was still struggling. My father's voice was slow, careful. You built this place? From scratch, I said, with the help of a few investors whom I've since bought out. My mother's hand went to her pearls, her go-to defense when socially destabilized. You didn't tell us, she said, wounded. You didn't ask. You let us sit here and insult my food, I cut in. Yes, you did. Camille flushed deep red. Grant suddenly found his wineglass very interesting. Jackson leaned back, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. Emily looked like she wanted to disappear and apologize at the same time. Well, my father said finally, as if this explained anything. This is impressive. I looked at them all, still seated around a table I had built, beneath lights I had chosen, in a restaurant I had dreamed into being. They had spent the entire evening treating me like the help. And now? Now they would have to sit in it, every bite, every word. Served cold. I hadn't planned for this. Not exactly. Sure, I'd imagined the moment, more than once, when the truth would slip out like a perfectly timed souffle. I'd seen the stunned expressions, the stammered apologies, the silence that follows a power shift so absolute it scrapes the air clean. But I hadn't thought it would feel so hollow. My mother sat rigidly, her hand still resting against her pearls like they might shield her from reality. Her face had gone pale beneath her expertly applied makeup. The facade of Southern grace was beginning to crack. My father stared at me, mouth slightly open, as though trying to calculate how much pride he'd swallowed in the last 60 seconds. And Camille, sweet, venom-laced Camille, looked like someone had yanked the rug out from under her and she was still trying to pretend she'd meant to fall. You're really the owner? She asked, her voice brittle. I nodded. She blinked at me, then glanced around the restaurant as if seeing it for the first time. Her gaze drifted upward to the light fixtures, down to the custom place settings, across the wide oak floor. This was your vision? Yes. But her lips parted, then closed again. Why wouldn't you tell us? I leaned back in my chair and crossed one leg over the other. Would it have mattered? My question landed hard, and no one rushed to answer. My father cleared his throat. We would have supported you. Like you supported me when I said I was leaving Vanderbilt? I said, keeping my voice even. When you told me I was throwing away my life? When you said real Harpers don't work in kitchens? He opened his mouth, then shut it again. I didn't tell you, I said, because I didn't want this success to be the thing that made my choices suddenly acceptable. I didn't want your respect to be conditional. A long silence. Then Jackson spoke, his voice low. You built all this on your own? I turned to him surprised. Of all of them, he'd always been the one with the most potential to listen. I had help, mentors, investors, but the blood, the hours, the blisters, those were mine. He looked down, his thumb running along the edge of his napkin. I should have called. I didn't know. I believed him, or at least I believed he regretted not knowing. Camille, however, wasn't finished. You let us sit here and, what, mock your food? Laugh at your life? That's cruel, Savannah. I turned to her slowly. You weren't mocking me. You were mocking people like me, people you thought were beneath you. You didn't know this food came from my hands, and still, you treated it with disdain. Why? She didn't answer. Grant, ever the opportunist, suddenly leaned forward. This place must generate serious revenue, he said. And the cookbook you mentioned? There's money in that too, right? I stared at him. You're trying to pivot this into a networking opportunity? He raised his hands. Hey, I'm just saying, if you're looking to expand... I let out a sharp laugh. You insulted my staff, you insulted my duck, and now you want to invest? He blinked, clearly not understanding what was so funny. My father, mercifully, cut in. Savannah, look, I didn't handle things well. Neither did your mother. But all of this is extraordinary. I waited. He hesitated, then added, You deserve respect. And I'm proud of you. The words sounded foreign coming out of his mouth, like he had borrowed them from someone else. My mother finally broke her silence. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "We judged you. We dismissed you. That was wrong." I didn't respond right away. Apologies. When they came too late, always tasted a bit bitter. But even bitterness had its place on the plate, if you paired it right. "I didn't build the Magnolia Room to win your approval," I said. "I built it because it's what I love. Because it's what I'm good at. That's enough for me now." Emily, who had been quiet throughout most of the evening, leaned in gently. "I had no idea, Savannah. I just booked the restaurant because someone at Jackson's firm said it was the most impressive spot in the city." I offered her a small smile. "That's the only reason I said yes." My mother looked down at the table, her fingers brushing over the tablecloth like she could smooth out the awkwardness. You're remarkable," she said, "and I'm sorry it took success for us to say that." The words hit harder than I expected. I wasn't sure if I forgave her yet, but I heard her. Miranda appeared at my side just then, a welcome interruption. Her crisp whites were immaculate, and her dark curls were pinned tightly at the nape of her neck. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her eyes scanning the table. "Savannah, the Matsuhisa party is ready for their tasting, and your publisher called about the cookbook design." I nodded, grateful for the excuse to step away. "I'll join them shortly," I said. Miranda smiled, then glanced at my family. "Your daughter's the real deal," she said to no one in particular. "One of the best chefs I've ever worked with." Then she was gone. I rose from the table. "I have a business to run," I said. My mother stood too. "Savannah, please don't leave it like this. We'd like to know you again, the real you." I looked at her. For the first time, she wasn't posturing. She wasn't smiling for appearances. She was just a mother who realized too late she hadn't truly seen her child in years. I gave a small nod. "Maybe," I said, "but only on my terms." And then I turned and walked away. Into my kitchen, into my world, into the life I had built. Not to impress them, but to finally belong to myself. The next morning, Charleston was unusually quiet. A pale sun filtered through my apartment window, catching the edges of stacked cookbooks and casting long shadows across the floor. The air smelled faintly of citrus and rosemary, last night's service lingering like memory. I sat at the small round table by the window, a cup of black coffee warming my hands, and stared out at King Street slowly coming to life. People strolled by in linen shirts and sundresses. Shops opened their doors, and the city returned to its rhythms as if nothing monumental had happened the night before. But something had. Something had shifted. Not just in the air, but inside me. The reveal, the dinner, the silence that followed. It all hung in my chest like a weight that was somehow both grounding and freeing. I hadn't expected closure. I certainly hadn't expected apologies. But the quiet after the storm was heavier than I imagined. Maybe because I had spent so many years building myself up for a confrontation that, when it finally happened, dissolved faster than anticipated. There were no plates smashed, no screaming matches, no dramatic exits, just stunned silence, a few halting apologies, and the slow collapse of a dynamic that had ruled my life since childhood. My family wasn't cruel. They were conditioned to see value through the lens of prestige, to measure success in bank accounts and degrees and last names. Last night cracked that lens, even if it didn't shatter it completely. I took a sip of coffee and scrolled through my phone. 2 missed calls from my mother, 1 text from my father, a link to an article titled "Southern Women Redefining Culinary Excellence." No comment, just the link. I wasn't sure if it was a peace offering or a plea for relevance. Then another text came in. "Camille, brunch this weekend? Just us. I promise not to bring Grant." A hesitant smile crept across my face. Camille never apologized directly. That was as close as she would get. And maybe, for now, that was enough. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a loose blouse, tied my hair up, and headed downstairs. The Magnolia Room was quiet, post-service clean. Jessica stood near the hostess stand, scribbling notes on the reservation ledger. She looked up when she saw me. "Morning, boss." "Morning," She tilted her head. You good? I think so. Your family still breathing? Unfortunately, I said with a smirk. Though I think I gave Grant a mild stroke. Jessica laughed softly. You handled it better than I would have. Honestly, we were all holding our breath. I nodded. Thanks for keeping it professional, especially Marcus and Miranda. We've got your back, she said simply, then turned back to her ledger. I made my way to the kitchen where the prep team was already at work. The smell of yeast and browning butter filled the space, familiar and comforting. Miranda stood at the back counter, inspecting a tray of delicate pastries. Hey, I said. She looked up and grinned. So, you lived. Barely. She handed me a spoon with a dab of new cherry compote. Thought you might want something sweet this morning. I tasted it, tart and bright, just the right amount of sugar. Perfect. Miranda leaned back against the counter, folding her arms. So what now? They throw you a parade? Put your face on the family crest? I laughed. More like cautious texts and brunch invitations. Brunch, huh? Camille wants to meet, just the two of us. Miranda raised an eyebrow. You going? I think so. She didn't say anything for a moment, then nodded slowly. Good. But don't shrink to fit, okay? Not after everything you've built. I won't, I said, and I meant it. Later that afternoon, I sat in the office, reviewing supplier invoices and finalizing notes for the cookbook shoot scheduled next week. My editor had emailed a mock-up of the cover. My name, embossed in gold script, hovered over an image of me standing in the Magnolia Room kitchen, sleeves rolled, a copper pan in hand, flames leaping just behind me. It looked real, like a life I'd earned. As I was about to close my laptop, another message came in. This one from Jackson. I'd like to bring the kids to see the kitchen sometime. I want them to see that success can look like a lot of different things. I stared at the screen for a long moment, surprised by how much those words meant. I replied simply, anytime. Bring them on Saturday before service. I'll show them how to fold ravioli. By evening, the restaurant was humming again. No family at the center table, no judgment disguised as small talk, just guests. Some new, some returning, clinking glasses, tasting food, sharing laughter. This was my world, and I had filled it with warmth and discipline, flavor and fire. And finally, I could stand in the center of it all without apology. I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I wasn't the rebel, or the disappointment, or the lost daughter. I was Savannah Harper, chef, owner, mentor, woman. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. Camille had chosen a bistro on Queen Street with sidewalk seating and wrought iron chairs that wobbled ever so slightly on the uneven brick pavement. It was the kind of place that served overpriced avocado toast with heirloom tomatoes and a smear of labneh, marketed as Southern European fusion, though it felt more like a Charleston version of what influencers thought Paris should taste like. She was already seated when I arrived, wearing a silk blouse the color of champagne and oversized sunglasses that screamed, "Don't look at me unless you're taking a flattering picture." I had forgotten how perfectly curated her appearance always was, how every strand of hair obeyed her sense of order, and how even in casual settings, she carried herself like someone perpetually on stage. I walked toward the table, unsure of what face to wear. There had been so many versions of me over the years. The little sister trailing behind her, craving approval. The defiant culinary school dropout. The ghost who vanished from the family group chats and reappeared as a headline in Charleston Eats Monthly. Oh, but none of those felt right now. Today, I was just Savannah, somewhere between a strange sibling and self-made woman, hoping that whatever this brunch was meant to be, it wouldn't unravel the tentative threads of peace we'd managed to stitch together. She looked up as I approached, then took off her sunglasses with a practiced flick. "You came," she said, her voice softer than I expected. I slid into the seat across from her. "Of course I did. You promised no Grant." That earned a brief smile, genuine and fleeting. "He's golfing. With Dad." "Of course." We were quiet as the server came by with menus and poured water. I didn't need to read mine. I'd been here before. It hadn't impressed me then either. Camille toyed with the corner of hers, not even glancing at it. "I didn't sleep much last night," she said after the server left, kept playing it over in my head. "The dinner. What you said." I nodded slowly, unsure whether she wanted a response or just space to speak. You were right, she continued. About all of it. We judged you. Worse than judged you, we diminished you. And for what? Because you didn't do things the way we did? I let the question hang. She wasn't really asking me. She was unraveling something aloud, and I knew better than to interrupt. I think I was jealous, she admitted. You left. You actually left. I've been living in that family's expectation like it's a skin I can't take off. You slipped out of it and became someone else, someone real. That surprised me. Not because it wasn't true, but because I never expected her to say it. Camille had always been the golden child, the star pupil, the picture-perfect debutante who won scholarships and pageants, and our parents' undivided pride. I never imagined she might have felt trapped by all of it. I didn't leave because I was brave, I said finally. I left because I couldn't breathe. She looked at me, eyes rimmed red, mascara perfectly intact. But you stayed gone because you were strong. We both laughed quietly at that, not because it was funny, but because the truth of it had weight. And sometimes laughter is the only way to lift it. The server returned, took our orders, eggs Benedict for her, poached eggs with lentils and greens for me, and left again with practiced indifference. I read every article about your restaurant, Camille said, sipping her mimosa. Even the one in Bon Appetit. I clipped it. I didn't tell anyone, it felt like admitting defeat. But I kept thinking, you did it. You really did it. I looked down at my water glass, condensation pooling at the base. You could have called. I didn't know what to say, she said quickly. What was I going to do? Apologize for being a condescending brat my entire life? That would have been a good start, I said, but my tone was gentle. She winced. I deserved that. Yes, I agreed. But you're here. That counts. The food arrived and we both paused, instinctively inspecting our plates. Old habits. Her fork hovered above the eggs Benedict, then lowered with precision. She took a bite, chewed slowly, and sighed. Okay, this is good. Not Magnolia Room good, but solid. I chuckled. You don't have to flatter me. It's not flattery. It's the one compliment I know how to give and still sound like myself. We ate quietly for a few minutes, the conversation resting between us like a third plate we were hesitant to touch. I could feel something else coming, a shift in her posture, the way her fingers tightened around her napkin. I always thought you'd come back, she said finally. Not like last night, but eventually. For Christmas, maybe, or when Dad got sick that one time. I thought you'd show up and let us fix it. I met her eyes. I wasn't waiting for anyone to fix it. I was building something better. She nodded, looking away. I know that now. I didn't back then. Back then I thought your silence was punishment. It wasn't. I know, she whispered. But it felt like it. The check came. She reached for it, but I was faster. I've got this, I said. Savannah? It's just brunch, I replied. Besides, we're family. Isn't that what family does? She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. As we stood, she hesitated, then pulled me into a hug. It was awkward. Camille was not the hugging type, but it was real. I felt her press her forehead against my shoulder for just a second before letting go. I'm proud of you, she said, even if I never said it before, even if I didn't understand it. Thank you? We parted at the edge of the sidewalk, sunlight slanting through the oaks overhead. As I walked away, I didn't feel lighter exactly, but I felt something shift, a knot loosening, a window cracked open. Sometimes, reconciliation doesn't come in grand gestures or sweeping apologies. Sometimes, it's two sisters eating overpriced brunch on a quiet street in Charleston, finally speaking honestly between bites of eggs and regret. 3 days passed before my father called. Not a text, not an email, an actual phone call. I let it ring twice before answering, mostly out of instinct. Part of me expected it to be accidental. Maybe he'd pressed something on his phone while checking the stock market or scanning the headlines. But when I answered, his voice came through steady, clipped in the way only Harold Harper could sound when trying to appear casual, while walking barefoot over emotional glass. Savannah, he said, as if confirming to himself that I had in fact picked up. Dad, I replied, carefully neutral. A long pause followed. I could hear a rustle papers maybe, or the shifting of a chair, and then a quiet sigh. I've been thinking about that dinner, he said at last. So had I. I'd replayed it a dozen times in my mind. The duck, the bill, the silence, the moment everything tilted on its axis. But I didn't interrupt. I wanted to know what he had taken from it. I realized, he continued, that for all my talk about family legacy, I never really asked what your legacy might be. I sat down at my kitchen table, fingers curling around a mug I hadn't realized I was holding. Outside, someone was trimming hedges. The world kept spinning. I think, he said slowly, oh, we confused guidance with control. And I suppose I believed that if you didn't follow the path I carved, you'd be lost. But you weren't. No, I said softly. I wasn't. Another pause, shorter this time. I visited the restaurant today, he added, almost as an afterthought. Didn't say anything to the staff. Sat at the bar, ordered a bourbon and the scallops. I blinked. You hate scallops? I did, he said, until today. That made me smile, small and involuntary. Did you enjoy it? I did. They were remarkable, complex, balanced. I asked the bartender what made them so good, and he said, "That's just Savannah. She has a way of pulling flavor from places most people overlook." I swallowed hard. I wanted to tell him I was your father, he went on, voice thickening ever so slightly. But I didn't. I wasn't sure I had the right to. Not after everything. You do, I said after a breath. If you mean it. I do, he said. I'm proud of you, Savannah. Not just for what you've built, but for doing it without needing us to see it first. There was silence after that. Not the awkward kind, but something quieter, heavier, like a page turning in a book neither of us had finished. Then he cleared his throat. We're having dinner this Sunday, just the immediate family, at the house. Camille said she'd handle the food, but your mother is terrified she'll burn something. I chuckled. She probably will. She said we should ask if you'd cook. I paused. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew what saying yes would mean. This wouldn't be cooking as a display or a test. It would be personal, intimate, a sign that something broken might be beginning, slowly, to mend. I'll bring dessert, I said. That made him laugh, a real laugh, short and low but genuine. I'll take what I can get. When we hung up, I sat in the stillness for a long time, watching the way sunlight hit the edge of the counter, warming the marble. That night, I went back into the kitchen at the Magnolia Room long after the staff had gone. I tied on my apron, rolled up my sleeves, and began testing a new recipe. Something bright but grounded. Something that started soft and finished bold. By Sunday afternoon, I pulled up to the family house. Yes, that house. Carrying a tray of lemon olive oil cake with thyme glaze. The kind of cake that felt like spring even in late summer. A cake that could hold conversation in its layers, forgiveness in its sweetness. Camille met me at the door, barefoot and apron stained. I told them not to expect soufflés, she said dryly, and I burned the green beans. That's what the cake is for. Inside, my mother was laying the table. No pearls today, just a linen blouse and a nervous smile. She didn't say much, just touched my arm in passing like she wanted to say 1,000 things but didn't know which one to start with. Jackson arrived a few minutes later with Emily and the kids. They raced into the house like the floor was made of trampoline. I bent to greet them, and one of them asked, wide-eyed, "Is it true you have a fire in your kitchen?" "Sometimes," I said, "but only when the sauce gets too excited." They laughed, and I did too. Dinner wasn't perfect. The roast was dry, the rolls were store-bought. But no one complained. And when it came time for dessert, all eyes turned to me, not with expectation, but with anticipation. And when they took that first bite, the silence was warm this time, not heavy. Afterward, my father stood and raised his glass. No speech, no toast. Just a small nod in my direction. "To Savannah," he said simply. I looked around the table, at the people who had once misunderstood me, overlooked me, tried to mold me into something quieter, safer. And I realized that for the first time I wasn't sitting on the edge of this family. I had a seat at the table, and it was mine. Some endings come with fireworks, others with a door slamming shut. Mine came in the quiet hum of a closing shift, the soft clatter of polished silverware being returned to its place, the click of lights dimming one by one in a kitchen that had carried my whole life. It was midnight, a few days after the family dinner. The Magnolia Room had emptied out slowly, the last guests lingering over coffee and whispered goodbyes. Now the dining room stood still in its afterglow, candles half melted, wine glasses kissed by fingerprints, echoes of laughter still clinging to the brick walls. I stood behind the bar, alone, sipping a cup of chamomile tea I hadn't even realized I wanted. The sweetness was faint, but comforting, like something softly earned. A few hours ago, my mother had texted me a photo of the lemon cake, what was left of it anyway, arranged on their old china plates. Your father insisted on having the last piece with his morning coffee. He called it sharp but elegant, just like someone we know. I didn't reply, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I was still learning how to absorb love when it came in new forms. Awkward, quiet, a bit late, but real. A year ago, if you had asked me what I wanted from my family, I might have said respect, recognition, a seat at the table. Now, I realized, I never truly wanted them to understand my journey in its entirety. I only wanted them to stop trying to rewrite it. And they had. In their own ways, imperfect, clumsy, human, they had stopped resisting the truth of who I was. But more than that, I had stopped needing their permission to be her. That was the greater shift. Earlier tonight, before we closed, I'd sat down with Miranda and Jessica to go over next month's menu. A new dish had emerged from our brainstorming: seared snapper with a sorghum glaze, served over stone-ground grits, and garnished with preserved citrus. It sounded like home and ambition all on one plate. It felt like everything I'd fought to build. Think it'll scare the old money diners? Miranda had asked with a grin. Maybe, I'd replied, but it'll wake up the ones who are still hungry. Now, standing in the stillness of my restaurant, I thought about what it had taken to get here. Every scar on my hands, every night I fell asleep with the smell of garlic in my hair, every no that had paved the way to the most honest yes of my life. I'd come to Charleston to prove something, but I stayed to become someone. Not the obedient daughter, not the family disappointment, not even the culinary prodigy they now talked about like some urban legend. Just me, Savannah Harper, a woman who found her fire not in rebellion, but in remembering, who found her voice not through silence, but through seasoning, who built something strong enough to stand, even when love arrived late to the table. I moved to the windows, looking out at the quiet street. The trees were still, the lamps glowing with that old southern softness I had once tried to escape. Funny how peace has a way of coming back to the places we once ran from. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Camille. Mom wants your recipe for the lemon glaze. Says she's planning to bake it for brunch with the neighbors. I told her it's not just the recipe that makes it work. It's the hands behind it. I smiled. Maybe that was what legacy really was. Not titles, not lineage, not wealth, but the things we pass on that carry a piece of who we are. I walked back into the kitchen, turned off the last light, and stood there for a moment, letting the dark settle around me. Then I whispered, just for myself, "Finally, I'm full." And I meant it. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.